Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress, and welcome to part 2 of Creating DX Hotels, presented by technical evangelist Paul Usher. In part 2 of this presentation, Paul will complete the build-out of DX Hotels, including the search panel, results details, and booking pages, as well as show how to display an extra report embedded in your website. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Paul Usher.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and good morning to everyone. Part 2 of Building DX Hotels. We're going to get straight into it today. We're going to complete the search panel, build the results details and booking page, and then look at how to embed a report into your website. I'm going to jump straight over to Visual Studio and pick up where we left off. We'll start by running the application, and we can see the page as we left it. The beautiful landing page minus the search panel. Now, since the last presentation, I have been a little sneaky. Inside the project, I've added a couple of extra little things. The SearchState class. Now, the SearchState class has one job and one job only, and that is to take the query string that we're going to be passing around to the different pages and turn it into a set of usable objects, effectively strongly typing the query results. So things like the check-in date, the checkout date become date time fields. The rooms count become integers, etc. So the SearchState class, its only purpose is to perform that conversion back and forth. And it is going to be used in every page, but to save time, I'm not going to type it out. The other thing that I've done is created some extra helper methods inside the data provider class. We'll see here that these are just collections of things that we're going to use in the pages. So we've got a list of string being our location ratings, which is bound to the results page. We've got a dictionary of integer and string for date times resulting on the credit card information page, etc. for bookings. So nothing really major there, and a list of all the states in the US, again, for easy binding. Moving along, we want to create the search panel control. I'm going to start by clicking on User Controls, right-click and Add, and we should be able to select Web User Control from the context menu. Of course, if it's not shown here, you can access it through the Add New Item. We're going to call this the search panel, and then we're sitting inside the HTML page. I'll minimize the Solution Explorer to get it out of the way, and we're ready to start adding a markup inside here. As far as the actual HTML component goes, it's really quite simple. We're using this ASPX form layout control. And we're going to be seeing a lot of this little guy throughout today's presentation. I'm going to invoke the designer and see what's going on. Just wait for Visual Studio to catch up with us. And choose designer. As I described in the previous presentation, it's a very powerful tool for doing form layouts or for doing any kind of repetitive layout. We can see that we've got position for the caption. We've got the combo box, which is going to be used to hold a drop-down list of venues such as cities, countries, and the number of hotels featured inside that area. We've made allowance for the validation. We've got a spot for our check-in and check-out date boxes, more validation, and then rooms and our spin edit controls for adults and children. We've then got our callback panel. So using something like the form layout designer, it makes it really, really fast to implement those controls. The result is that we get all the layout as we see here. You'll also notice that on each control, we've got an ASPX validation entry. And this is so that we can ensure the user has selected values or typed things in that we want, and we can make sure that they can't proceed to the next entry until that happens. As far as the ASPX combo box that we introduced, we've added 3 columns. One to define the city, the country, and the number of hotels. These are bound simply with the field name, city, country, and hotels count. And we can see that that is using a linked data source, picking up the information from our entity framework entities collection. As I scroll down through here, we've got the basic entries, room count, and what I'm looking for is the pointer to some of the internal or client-side code that we're going to run. We'll see here we've got things, a client-side event, validate and perform search. Just casting your mind back to when we looked at the page for the very first time, we know that as we increase the number of adults, things like the number of rooms increase. Likewise, if we've got children, we can only select up to 3 children for a single adult, 6 children for the second, and if I change the adult count back, it's going to bring in the script, and we can step through it. You can see here a function called setChildMax, which gets the control and sets the max value of the child spin edit to that of the adult count multiplied by 3. We can also see that after it does some more validation, it calls out to calc rooms, which then sets the number of rooms based on the number of available adults, working on the simple premise that if you've got 3 or more adults, you should have 2 or more rooms. Now there is a little bit of code behind on the search panel as well, so I'm going to jump into the code window, and I'll bring that code across. We're starting out by setting a property called isPopUp. Of course, one of the great things with user controls is the code reuse, and we know that the search panel is going to be used inside some of the other forms to allow the end user to update or manipulate their search results. So we've got this property that we're going to be using. Here's an instance of that SearchState class that I talked about before. And if we expand this a little bit further, we'll see that we've got the init event. So effectively what's happening here, we come through and we say, okay, are we dealing with a set of valid request parameters or query string into the page? If we're not, then, well, first of all, we're instantiating the state, and then we're going to do something in the page load with that. The actual check-in date edit, we want to set as a minimum date being tomorrow's date. Because obviously in an example like booking a hotel, we don't want the user to be able to go back in time to say they want to book earlier than we want. Providing that that state object is not already null or is not null, we come through and rebind some of those control values. So if the user is moving backwards and forwards throughout the site, we're simply refreshing those values for them. Otherwise, we're setting the default value for both the check-in and check-out date. Check-in is tomorrow, and we're working on a premise that they're going to be staying a minimum 2 days, which they can alter if they want. The next step is going to be looking at the page load event. And here we're saying, okay, if the pop-up control is invoked, so we're working on something other than our basic landing page, then we want to change the class that the search box is using. Currently, switching back to the page, the search box invokes this nice semi-transparent panel, and we've got the word search on the main thing because it's the first time you're seeing it. What we want to do if it's used as a pop-up is alter that class predominantly so that it's not transparent and change the wording on the button to apply instead of search. Next, we're implementing the search button itself. I'm just going to resolve this namespace. What happens when we pass this name value collection through to the get query string is it converts all the values and returns a single query string that we're going to pass back to the results page. And then the resulting page will be called inside a redirect. Before I actually run that, I need to do one other thing, and that's come back to the markup inside a default page, and we'll see we've got the placeholder for the search panel sitting here. I want to replace that by dragging in my search panel onto that page. Now this little green line seems to indicate that I've called it something different to what it's expecting. So look at my user control, search panel control, try build. Everything looks to be happy now. Let's run the page and see what happens. Wait for the page to render on screen. And we can now see that we've got our landing page with the search panel. We're seeing that the dates are preset. The beautiful calendar controls are set up with our validation. And I can drop down the page and I've now got my binding showing city, country, and number of hotels. Of course, there's no point pressing the search button. It would simply result in an error because the results page doesn't yet exist. So let's close those up. And now we'll build the results page. Right-clicking on the project, and I want to add a web form with master. Again, if this doesn't exist here, we go through the add new item. I want a web form, remembering that there is a space between it, otherwise you get no results. Select the language, give it a name. We want this to be called results, and make sure that you've got the tick on select master page. I'm going to click add, make sure I select the correct master, which in this case there is only one, and click OK. So now we have a master page. We're not using any content from the master page to update the header, so I'm going to remove that entry, and I'm now ready to start looking at the control and HTML. Let's just remind ourselves what it is that we're going to be building on the results page. Obviously the header and footer are carried across from the master page, so that's good. We've got this hotel summary at the top showing me the details of where I'm staying, or the locale of where I'm staying, the dates, and the summary of the search, and a little map of the area. We've got this summary information, results, 9 hotels, and then we've got the implementation of the token control. Underneath that, we've got the DX data view representing each of the items with a pager control in place to step through because we know that there were 9 entries. And then on the right-hand side, we've got this little filter control which allows me to streamline those results a little further as well. So a few things I want to point out here as we start to build this. The token edit control in this case has been predominantly set up so that you can only remove entries from here. You can't actually add new entries into the token editor, but it is a great visual way of representing some of those filter items. You'll see from this box I can actually come through and I can change the city that I want to represent or look for a hotel in and go apply. We're going to see the page is redrawn with the new query string passed in, and now my summary control and my token box has been updated. Below this we've got the nightly rate, which is a slider control, and as I change this we're going to see the label on the left update. And I want to point this out because this is all done using a little bit of client-side code, but gives you a really nice result at the end of it. So with that in mind, let's jump back to Visual Studio and start adding in the HTML. We're dealing in result page, so we'll start by expanding some of the code. We're starting out with a new div called results header, and we're back to adding our content in using the different column classes that we've generated. The first thing we're going to do is add in the map image, again using the little show loading image if there is any latency on the server. We're bringing in a header tag pointing to the area that we're staying in, and also the filter text. I'm not too worried at the moment about the red squiggles because we've still got a fair bit to add. R2 is going to bring in the second part of this with our content column, and we'll expand that out with R3, and we can see that this is the results section. Here we're just adding in some labels, so ASPX label controls, and binding those, set some placeholders, and we can see the filter token box as well. You'll notice on the token box that we've got the token remove button style is actually been set up so it can be used, and that we've implemented the on value changed, which is some server-side code that we'll be implementing as we go through. This next piece of code, we're going to see the data view be built. Let's remove that out of the way. Now, the ASPX data view is very much a data repeater control, and it has a lot of power. You can build template items inside it to present that data in a really rich fashion. We can see here as we go through, I might switch to the designer for a second and just invoke the template editor to give you an idea. Wait for Visual Studio to catch up again and come down. So here we've got the ASPX data view. I'm going to click on the smart tag and I'm going to choose the designer. I'm actually going to choose edit templates. The designer in this instance would invoke the client-side code editor. But because we're working with a template model, we want to invoke the template editor. Again, waiting for Visual Studio. Sometimes we find that GoToWebinar tends to slow down because of the screen capture and everything else that's going on. So you just have to bear with me while we wait for that. Once we're inside the item template editor, we can see we've got this thing called item template. And inside here, I can apply any standard control. So for example, I'm using the ASPX hyperlink control, which is going to be bound to the hotel image. If I invoke the smart tag, you can see that I've got access to one or more direct properties. I could set the image URL directly, or I could jump in and I can look at the data bindings. So behind the scenes, I'm binding the navigate URL to get the value of a code expression, get hotel details URL, passing in the hotel ID. When we build this code shortly, we'll see exactly what gets returned. But effectively, we're seeing control after control added to this template, knowing that when the data is passed in, it's going to act like a data repeater and render the elements on screen. So let's end template editing and switch back to our source view. As we step through, we can see the code behind for each of those items inside the template class, passing in just a straight eval binding on some items. We can see the labels as they appear. So there's nothing super exciting going on behind the scenes, and the designer makes it really nice to use when it comes to your actual design. Let's implement R5 now. And R5, we're looking at the form filter, which was on the right-hand side. Again, we're seeing the use of this ASPX form layout control. It is just such a powerful little tool and makes adding all these elements in a snap. In fact, you could save literally hours in an entire web project by using that one item. As far as what's actually happening here, standard controls, we're seeing some drop-downs, we're seeing some data source being bound to it, images being set, and then we've got this nightly rate where we had the ASPX track bar. You can see that we've got a label being set left and right, and it's this information here that we're going to be interacting with inside our code behind to update. We've got this client-side event, which is coming through and calling the position changed, so that when we drag that slider control, it's going to be updating at the client in real time. We're implementing the customer-based rating system, again with some custom JS properties, which we'll be looking at in the code behind. Here we've got the drop-down control, so another use of the ASPX combo box, adding in our rating values. And as far as the HTML code, that should be sufficient. So we're going to switch over to C# now, or the code behind file, and bring in some code to look at. We're seeing the implementation of that SearchState class, And on the page load event, we're then checking to say, do we have a valid page set of query string coming in? If not, we want to automatically reroute the user back to that landing page. So effectively, what's going to happen there, if the user types in results.aspx and it's not in a fashion that we wanted, then they'll be automatically rerouted back to the landing page to say, hey, fill in your initial search query correctly. If we're not in the middle of a post back, then what we're seeing here is the implementation of the binding on those basic controls. The red squiggles represent code that we're yet to write, so we can step through and add that in. GetDecimal is doing some conversion on the filter return. We've then got some other codes coming through for ensure the tokens list. So here we're just doing some validation on the token control to make sure that any change to the token control matches our filter, or any change to the filter matches our token control. Any change to that will also result in the page being reloaded. We've got a collection of hotels inside the Find Hotels return, and that's going to be passing back from our hotel data source a matching set with the inline lambda. The Check Hotels filter is going through and building a relevant filter on what the user has selected. Here we're down to the custom JavaScript properties. Now, I do know that in the upcoming JavaScript webinar with Julian, he will explain a lot more about some of the JavaScript elements and how we interact at a client side and how you can extend our controls quite easily using things like custom JS properties. But effectively, we're setting up a collection so that we can track that left and right label and the price label for when the user scrolls on the slide bar, and the same with the rating control. I did say there was a lot of code to get through, so please stay with me, people. The filter token box, as soon as anything is changed inside there, it's simply going to invoke the ensure tokens list method, therefore making sure that a page reload, if required, will happen. And then when the apply filter button is selected, we go through and rebuild that query string, forcing a reload on the results page. So if you change the state or the country you're looking for, etc., or even just the ratings or the price, you're going to see the end result immediately. Now, I pointed out when we built the template that it was going to call out and look for a function called getHotelDetailsURL, passing in the hotel ID. So this is going to return, based on that hotel ID, a formatted URL, in this case details.aspx, passing in a valid query string with the hotel details. So when we get to build the details page, we're going to see how that parameter is then used to populate all the relevant data and binding. And then finally we have the booking button, which allows us to implement and say, yes, I want to actually stay at this particular hotel. We'll just do a resolve on the namespace. And we can see here that we've got the hotel itself being returned as a data item, and then we're building that query string or URL again, passing into the bookings page. So if I attempt to do a build on that page now, look for my build output. One of the things that I was expecting to, we won't see the hotel summary until we actually go to the detail screen, so that's okay. Oops, go to my output and everything's happy. Let's invoke the page and just make sure that everything is running as we expect so far. You'll notice that I've started the browser on the results.aspx page. It's gone through and said, no, you don't have any valid parameters. I'm therefore going to throw you back to this default page. So we'll choose some hotels from LA, hit search, and we're going to get our resulting page up. We can see the token control in place. we can see that the client-side events are actually working in real time. And if I was to click on the hotel details, obviously right now I would receive an error. But you can see from the bottom left-hand corner there where it's showing the little pop-up that that URL will be passed through with all the relevant parameters, location, check-in, check-out, etc. And of course, being embedded inside the master page means that our other previous pop-ups and everything else are all working. So the next progressive step is to create the actual hotel's detail page, since we might want to see a little bit more information about the hotel we're staying at. Let's see what that looks like. This would be us selecting the Venice Walk Hotel. In this page, we're going to be looking at how to create the user control for the hotel summary. Now that's important because it's used on more than one page. This is the booking page, and we can see the same control. We can also see the image gallery showing more images of the actual location I'm going to stay. We've got some feedback comments from customers, which we're going to implement. The description, and then the column details, and then the details of the rooms available. I'm going to be pointing out the use of a control that you probably wouldn't pick to start with, but this here is implemented as a navbar control rather than a data view or data grid. So we'll take a look at exactly the why and the benefits of using that. First step will be to create a new web form with master page, and we will call this one details. Select my site master, get rid of my head content, and open up ready for this section. It should be DT1, so it's going to be T1 I believe for details. The first part is creating the details header. Again, we're introducing this nice standard class for content column, and we're going to see this commented out block for the hotel summary control. Next, we're implementing the filter text and the button to reapply a filter. I'll come back and create the summary control in just 1 second. Let's expand out and see what gets built inside this other section. Now this is probably one of the larger of the pages as far as content. Bookings is by far the largest, but this one has more information we want to take a look at. To start out with, we're looking at that image slider control, showing you pictures of the hotel that we're going to stay at. Now implementing that is as simple as dropping on the image slider control and setting the URL field to point to where we're going to go, which of course will be done in code behind. The next stage is what our guests say. So that's the panel on the right-hand side, and it's going to be the customer review. With this one, we're using the ASPX data view again. And just as we saw previously, it's a matter of implementing the item template. We're passing in the field called review text. We've then got a change of class because the date field we want a little bit less contrasting as much as the information. The customer comment was more valuable, but we want to show when the last comment was posted. So we're formatting the field there as a nice month, day, year. We've then got the rating control again, only this time the rating control is going to be marked as read-only because it's not relevant to what you think, it's telling you what somebody else thought about the hotel. That in itself, if we jump back to the page, implements this entire top section. One line of code using the ASPX gallery control, which gives us this beautiful, rich presentation of the photos, and then the data view. Now we've locked it out so that there'll be no pager controls, and we can limit the amount of content that's going to be shown. You agree that the end result is quite stunning. Next, we'll be implementing the description section. At this point, after using a label to bring in the basic description of the hotel, which is our ASPX label here, we're actually coming through and using not one, but 3 individual ASPX data view controls. Each one features a simple label bound to the description, and we're limiting that by the particular hotel feature set. So here we've got the features of the hotel, we've got the room features, and then finally we've got any location services that the hotel might offer. They're bound straight to the data class. When you see them in line, features, rooms, and location, you wouldn't realize that there are 3 individual items there. We just found it really easy and quick to implement that nice style without having to worry about what happens if you've got more features or less things on rooms. The rendering of it is taken care of by that view control. And then the main element to look at is this navbar control. We've been featuring things like the ASPX view control or data view. We might have used a grid control or other things, but the navbar just seemed perfect for the idea of what we want to represent. See, navbars normally would be something that you'd see on the left-hand side of menu systems that you can collapse and expand. But in this case here, we wanted to get across a particular point. We can see that we're representing all the different types of rooms that are available inside my hotel. If I click on single, you'll notice that the other rooms are automatically collapsed. I can't actually collapse just one type, so I'm always going to have a view that presents some nice graphical asset on screen. You'll notice things such as the icon changes when I do a click to show me that I'm currently expanded on a particular view. And inside here, we're going to be looking at things like, again, a gallery control, and then these little glyphs and details on the room. We've got this nice implementation of the fact that it's the lowest price, a specific date, the price, and then the ability to book the room. As far as implementation itself goes, there's only a few things that we need to be wary of. We've got a client-side event happening, which is Unexpanded Change, which is basically going to take care of the collapsing of other things. We can see that over here, we've got the expand button position onto the left, and that we've set the system to automatically collapse everything else except for the current item. As far as the images go, I'm manually setting the expand and collapse button pictures so that I've got control and it fits in with the rest of the site. We're seeing the use of templating again, so our group header template is going to take care of the type of room it is. And then we're implementing on the right-hand side of the group template that other key data, so lowest price and the available date. Again, just implementing inline formatting. The price, using the classes or the CSS to actually update how that's going to look and formatting it back to a currency so that whatever that globalization was set to on my site would apply for my currency. And then finally, we're implementing the ASPX button control to say that I want to actually book the item. As far as the content itself goes for this, I've got some basic room description information showing. And then I'm implementing that ASPX image slider again. This time I'm going to be setting the data pointer for my actual room images on the fly based on what hotel has been set. And we can see that we want to implement a thumbnail item click event, which in actual fact is going to show a pop-up control because we might want to see more information on those rooms. Moving down to the room info, the old favorite ASPX data view, setting a column count to 2, itself using a template with the ASPX image and a basic feature. The result there is this 2-column data view featuring the image and the description. So again, stock standard controls that are providing really nice results in different environments or different scenarios. Talking of pop-up controls, we've got two that we want to deal with here. The first one is going to be what happens when we click on a room. So right now, if we want to get a better view as to what's going on inside the rooms, we'll click on the picture. The ASPX gallery control is going to be shown inside the pop-up window, shown as a modal. So we are giving you the idea that the page behind isn't the focal point on screen, and I can step through as so. One thing you'll notice, this is the gallery control, and we came from a gallery control. But here, the left and right markers are placed inside our picture. What we've chosen to do on this page is actually have our navigation elements on the outside of the thumbnail view. So again, just tweaking to get that really nice effect. And then the final part of our pop-up control is going to be implementing the search panel. What I should be able to do is replace that placeholder and drag our search panel control in. And we'll notice that when we created the search panel, we added a property called isPopUp. So I'm going to set that value to true, and that is where it will change the class that's applied or the style that's applied to the control when it's rendered. Now there's one thing left to do on here, and that is to create the hotel summary user control. Before we do that, we will step in and do the code behind. Get rid of our page load event to start with. Now the code behind inside the details page is really quite straightforward. We're seeing the implementation of that state class. We're doing the usual result or redirect back to the default page if somebody tries to get to the details page without the correct parameters. We're then doing our binding for the navbar. Let's clear up resolving some namespaces. And same for the nav group. So what's happening inside the bind room's navbar is it takes the object type of hotel, it comes through and clears any groups, and then simply loops through every room inside the supplied hotel and adds a new group type, passing in the data item that we want and defaults it to be a collapsed group. Then adds that collection to the outside of the navbar. So as far as binding goes, it's really quite easy to add the data items or bind to that custom navbar control. This is telling me that it's looking for the hotel summary control, which we haven't added yet, and that's fine. But on page load, we're just seeing a bunch of binding take place. And then finally on the Book It button, we're coming through and we're going to redirect the user, again using the getQuery parameters, back to the booking.aspx page. So before we can run that, we actually need to go through and create that user control. We're going to add a new web user control. We're going to call this one Hotel Summary. We're back to our HTML view and we'll go Summary 1. And that's all there is to our summary control. Quite literally, a heading with a hotel name that's going to be passed from the object, the rating control, and then the address label itself. There is some code behind, it should be SM2, and here we've got a couple of things happening. We'll resolve the namespace first. Our page load event is setting the address property and the customer rating. You'll notice that I'm using here Inline Markup. So there is a property on the ASPX label control that allows me to supply markup into the text, which means I get granular control on my formatting. The loading of the map sets is simply to do with the rating and setting the base rating control to a transparent background as a placeholder. And then finally, we allow them to jump through and set the rating on the hotel if they want. So we come back to our markup on the details page. I should now be able to replace this content holder with our hotel summary control. Do a build. Everybody's happy. Again, we'll see that I'm trying to launch details. It spits me straight back to the default page. Select my hotel. Click on the details URL, and I'm going to see our details page in all its glory. The summary control has been used. We have a pop-up search control, customer review, description, and then the nav bar beautifully rendered. So the final stage is to come through and do the booking. Now the bookings page, if we think back to the live site, has a lot of information on it. In fact, there's over 600 lines of HTML that make up this page. I'm not going to step through every one of those because it's repeating the same processes we've used. We're going to see the form layout control used time and time again. Here we've got an implementation of the tab control with the form layout control. What we're really interested in is the reservation summary on the right-hand side, and then coming down to the ability to show that invoice. Because we said we'd build it all from scratch, I will go through and add the form and say this one is bookings. It's actually booking. If I get that wrong, I'm in trouble. Get rid of that head content, and instead of stepping through, I'm going to say I want all of the content for booking. Okay, just to cover what we said, we've got the summary control here. So again, I want to implement by just dragging my hotel summary into that top block. You'll notice that the control itself is registered each time you do that, which is important. Step through. We're telling people we're not a real hotel site for obvious reasons, and then we're seeing the implementation of those form layout controls with all the nested controls inside. So it's exactly what we wanted to show. The reservation summary, we're starting with a ASPX image control, binding it to the hotel. Same thing as we've done previously, bringing in things like the check-in date from our state control or object, setting the room info. We're using a data repeater to actually show you the different prices for the day. So here it's just an item template showing the period and price on a daily basis, all the way through. And the part that I'm interested in is this ASPX button here showing the invoice document viewer. Switching to design mode, we do have some code behind for the booking page as well, which we'll take a look at. Wait for Visual Studio to render everything on screen for me, which shouldn't take more than a second. Sliding down the canvas. In fact, what I'm going to do, because of the time it's taken to render that, is switch back to my source view and then implement the code behind. Otherwise, we're going to see this application is not responding with Visual Studio, which wouldn't be good since we only have a few minutes left to go through things. Source, F7, and let's just bring in the code behind. Resolve some namespaces. Here we can see that originally my summary control was called Hotel Summary Control, but I've renamed it to Hotel Summary. We can see the price binding happening for the repeater, and then the implementation of the document viewer. So the ASPX document viewer allows you to embed a report, such as but a DevExpress extra report inside your website. Now the actual report is going to be generated from a data class, and I'm going to switch over to another instance of Visual Studio and show you that report right now. In part one, I was explaining how we make certain design decisions when we're building some of these demonstration applications, and this was one of them. It made a lot more sense to keep a small report class inside our demo project than going off and creating external regex files and things that had to be generated. But basically, you can generate a brand new DevExpress report by adding in a new item into an existing project. And when you create a DX report file, we actually invoke our report designer into Visual Studio. Now, of course, by default, you can ship your own end-user report designer with your application as a WinForms control, and as a 14.2, we have our very first version of the web-based report designer as well. So you can actually give your clients the ability to edit reports if you want. Right now, we're going to look at the anatomy of the report that we built, and inside the report header, we've implemented the DX Hotels logo and then some nice little labels just to reference the fact that it was built using our controls. And in the actual detail band, we've implemented some labels which have all been carefully named so that we can do the binding with them inside our class. We're also featuring the rating control. We've got the image control for the report itself, and then the summary information. So as far as visually building a report, it can all be done quite happily inside your Visual Studio instance. In our case, the report itself was implemented as a class. So because of the style of project I started with, I'll show you behind the scenes. And this invoice class is just made up as any other UI element of these objects. So we're looking at the picture box, the line controls. The beauty is that you don't have to code this by hand because of that visual designer. So instead, the end result, let me just close these pages. Yes, I want to save. Yes, I want to save. When I build this and run it, I'm going to kick back to my default page, pick my hotel, do my search, say that I want to go straight to my bookings page. My bookings page is rendered the same as I'd expect with the information that I want on my actual reservation summary. As I scroll down, I want to look at the print invoice, and that's going to invoke that ASPX document viewer. It does allow you to use the inbuilt toolbars, and in our instance, we turn those off in favor of implementing our own print or export to PDF feature, and then the close button. We change the transparency inside our HTML to 80%. But what we have is that rendered report, logo, the rating control has been updated correctly, the details of the hotel with a little snapshot to remind me where I'm going, and then all my check-in, check-out details, so the 6th to the 8th of February and the price. What I'll do in finishing is just jump back into our booking markup. So I want to view markup, scroll to the bottom, and just see, as we look here, that we're implementing the toolbar as none. So the toolbar mode itself, see if I can invoke the wizard here. Visual Studio has started to get rather sluggish. We can see that for the ASPX document viewer, I could nominate a local report or even a URL to an external report. I can nominate whether I want to use the internal Adobe plugin or whether we want to try and print from the user's browser engine, and what type of toolbar I want to implement. So I could say I want the standard toolbar to be shown, or in this case none, because we want to implement our own little buttons. So there we have it, everybody. That is a building of DX hotels from the ground up, and in a amount of time of a couple of hours with lots of cool features to show off. And no doubt, Amanda, there's been lots of questions in the background.
There have been lots of questions that Julian, our lovely CTO, has been answering, but a couple came in that I saved for you. This one is from Colin. Are all the controls for each hotel detail panel preloaded at the initial page load? In the collapsed nodes, I mean.
Yes, they are.
All right. Let's see. Maybe I missed this one, but is the state control persisted from page to page?
So the state control is actually passed in. It's generated by the query parameters. So if we take a quick look, the SearchState class is actually generated from this collection of name value parameters, and that's passed through on the URL itself and created each time. So we're not saving to a session variable, we're actually passing it across as a URL in this example.
From Thomas, can reports designs be saved as a file or some other portable method using the end user designer?
Absolutely. So with the report designer, if you run, let's just remove the invoice report from the sample project. If you run the end user report designer, so here I've simply dragged it onto a new WinForms project, and you generate a report that can be saved out as a REPX or regex file and loaded in from an external source. And that can be external as in a complete separate URL or inside your website. Or you can obviously embed it inside your application as well. And one of the things, sorry Amanda, I want to point out here is the end user report designer is royalty free. So once you generate your application and give people the ability to create their own reports, there's no licensing model for you to be able to ship that.
Awesome. Is it possible to have the report project used to create the demo site report?
As an REPX file, as opposed to the class that's in the project, yes, I will make that file available on my blog later on this week.
All right. Let's see. I see the rating control was used on the page and on the report. Are all DevEx controls available in reports? Can reports be rendered as a PDF, Excel, etc.?
Okay, so when it came to the rating control, that was a custom image that was used. So at that point there was a little bit of helping going on. We look at content and reports. Inside here we generated an image for each state of that rating control. So not every control is available in the reports tool, but certainly a lot are. And the demos page on devexpress.com shows you how to actually use a lot of our controls in association with the report generation. As far as what it can be exported to, you can export to just about every conceivable type. PDF, CSV, RTF, Excel, XLSX. The reporting engine inside extra reports is absolutely phenomenal. You can combine reports, you can do custom binding on reports. If you create any type of enumerable control, you can pass it through to a report. And I know that certainly the guys that I've talked to here in Australia have done some amazing stuff worldwide with being able to control every aspect of the report. It also features an entire scripting engine behind, so you can interact with the report as it's been generated and do even more custom work on the fly.
All right, from Robert. How long do you think it takes to be familiar with DevExpress for a beginner to implement such a beautiful application?
Look, I think in order to answer that question, it comes down to the amount of experience you have as a developer. So there's two beginners to think about. There's a beginner developer or a beginner without controls. Now, if you're a beginner developer, the controls are a great place to start because we circumnavigate having to write a lot of code when it comes to applications like this. If you're an experienced developer, then that just got even shorter because your learning curve is to work through how we use our property sets or what events, etc. you want to implement. Certainly with our online training courses that are available, with the previous YouTube webinars and videos that are on YouTube, you can start producing some really classy websites very, very quickly. Think back to what I said in the beginning of part 1, and that was that a lot of this started with a designer saying, hey, I want this beautiful website. So it was our job as a developer to then make that happen. We didn't have to sit there and think, oh, what will look pretty? And that makes a big difference as well, working from that blueprint and turning it into ASP.NET reality.
Awesome. Let's see. From Fernando. For new report designer, let's see. Support scripts. How JavaScript, sorry, this is, I'm trying to reorder this question. For people new to the web report designer, how does it support scripts? Or how does JavaScript validate or do pop-up windows?
On the report designer for HTML, the new one, I'm going to refer you to check out a presentation that Seth Juarez did on the report designer in the What's New 14.2 because it will answer your question in a lot more depth than I could ever do it justice.
Okay, I'll find that and post it up. And that's it. Looks like all our questions.
Now, just in summary, building websites like this or building any project out and being able to share with people how we achieve some of those things is really good fun. And it's because of the feedback that we get from our customer base that we get to plan some of these webinars out. I know that Julian's going to be doing his JavaScript one shortly, and coming up in later on this quarter, we're going to be starting a series on WPF and how to transition from a WinForms developer to WPF. But if you've got ideas that you'd like to see us present, please email Amanda or the team or myself, anybody at Client Services, and we'd love to hear from you. Help us build things like this.
All right, everybody. As always, you can check out our webinars page for new and upcoming content at devexpress.com/webinars. The webinar that Paul referenced here on JavaScript that our CTO Julian Bucknell will be doing will be on February 17th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and it will be posted today so you can register. It is not quite up on our website yet. Coming up next week, DevExpress ASP.NET MVC Unobtrusive Validation, presented by technical evangelist Don Wibier. In this technical deep dive, Don will tell you all about validating user input to make sure that you get what you expect. He will explain the differences between obtrusive versus unobtrusive validation and why the latter is best suited to the MVC design pattern. And again, both parts 1 and 2 of this webinar series will be available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel, probably by the end of this week, and I will post a link to our YouTube channel in the chat box. And that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Paul. Thank you all for joining us, and of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.